As we watch this land, I want to bring in one of the last current members of Congress to have served when President Jimmy Carter was indeed president, Senator Ed Markey, Democrat of Massachusetts. Thank you for being with us. And as we watch the plane about to touch down, when you think of President Carter now, tell us what you remember most.
Well, I think about a man who now is viewed as a great president. The Camp David Accords, Israel and Egypt, the Superfund program to clean up hazardous waste sites across our country, wind and solar as a part of our energy mix to deal with pollution in our air and the greenhouse gases that are causing climate change, the work that he did in order to create a Department of Education, a Department of Energy, in order to look ahead and lead the way for our nation. And he always did so with a concern for those who are the least amongst us. I always think of Jimmy Carter as someone who tried to live out the Beatitudes of Jesus Christ. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are the sick. Blessed are those who are most vulnerable. That's who Jimmy Carter was every single day he was president, and every single day for the rest of his life after he left the presidency. Just an incredible American citizen.
In becoming a governor first and then president, and even to the end, he defied expectations. He was in hospice care for about the final 2 years of his life. But I know before he went into hospice care, I think you last connected with him in Nantucket. And I wonder if the Jimmy Carter you saw then, a man in his 90s that you spoke with, how was he compared to the man you knew in the office of President of the United States?
Well, he was a young man when I was talking to him up in Massachusetts. He was probably only 95 years old at the time, and he was making a passionate plea for the resources to deal with the plague of guinea worm around the world, and his goal to eradicate it, to help millions of people to avoid having to deal with that kind of suffering. And in the same way that there had been an earlier crusade to eradicate smallpox, it was Jimmy Carter who focused upon that preventable disease. And one of his legacies is that he and Rosalynn were successful in focusing upon it, getting the resources to deal with it. And when I talked to him, it was with that same focus, that same commitment to solving a problem, because he knew that human beings had the ability to alleviate human suffering if they focused upon the problem and then took action. And that was his whole life in a nutshell. Guinea worm, but going all the way back to his earliest beginnings as a public servant.
For all those reasons you just mentioned, Senator, do you think he has changed the perception of what a post-presidency can be and maybe should be?
I think he has. You know, there's a lot of political capital that a former president has. And what Jimmy Carter decided to do was to use it to help those most in need, to ensure that democracies across the rest of the planet are nurtured and protected, to ensure that human rights are focused upon as a central part of the American message to the rest of the world. You can't preach temperance from a bar stool. You have to practice it. And that's what Jimmy Carter did. Across the planet, he was a voice for democracy, for human rights, for eradicating disease, especially in those countries that otherwise would not have had the capacity to protect their people from the ravages of disease.
There is such a difference in the politics of today. As difficult as it may have seemed at the time, and it certainly was, Washington is never an easy place, has never been an easy place, and Jimmy Carter learned that the hard way. But I wonder what he would make of the politics of today. And do you think that there are echoes of the person he was that can resonate still today with people going into political life?
Well, obviously, Donald Trump does not share Jimmy Carter's view of of the world, of the responsibility that a government has to deal with human suffering. But I think that this past week's focus upon Jimmy Carter has helped to once again focus upon the better angels of our nature and how we can't forget those who would be left behind unless there was a conscious effort made by our government, by our people, to focus upon that suffering. And not just here, but all around the world. We're not just 4% of the world. We're the moral and political leader for the whole rest of the planet. And Jimmy Carter, in his post-presidency, tried to make sure that the whole rest of the world heard that highest aspiration, lifted our gaze to the constellation of possibilities for ourselves, for our country, and for the rest of the world. And my hope is that this last week has helped to inspire more people to dedicate their lives to that agenda.
And you touched, Senator, on some of his most notable achievements, the Camp David Accords, the creation of the Department of Education, his record on human rights, the Department of Energy. The lens of history is long. When you and I are gone, and when grandchildren and great-grandchildren are reading about the history of the United States, what do you think the major legacy of Jimmy Carter will be?
Well, Jimmy Carter is going to be viewed the same way that Harry Truman is viewed. When Harry Truman left office, people said that he had a failed presidency. As people look back at Harry Truman now, they realize he was a great man. The same thing is happening and will continue to happen for Jimmy Carter. He will be viewed to have had a great presidency, that he was a great man, that he was seeking to have our country move towards a better relationship with every one of our citizens, to give them, each and every one of them, what they needed, but to also project that set of values across the planet. And that's Middle Eastern peace. It's the Panama Canal Treaty. It's trying to focus upon the pollution that the United States was sending up that was going to be affecting the whole rest of the planet. I think he's going to be viewed as someone who truly was a visionary, who perhaps in some ways was not appreciated in his time. But as we look back, we can realize that he was just trying his best to have the United States respond to the challenge that the whole rest of the world hopes that we respond to, which is trying to ensure that we are the moral, the political, the economic, the human rights leader for the whole rest of the world. And I think increasingly people realize that Jimmy Carter was, in many ways, the originator of those messages, and history will be very generous to him and his presidency.